morning, everyone.
Good morning, Boker Tov.
I'm going to be just introducing our speakers this morning for this session, Who Will Be Tranquil and Who Will Be Tormented. So we have today Rabbi Sarah Berman and her daughter Miriam. Rabbi Berman was ordained at the Ziegler School and is a board-certified chaplain. During college at UC Santa Cruz, she worked as a nursing assistant in a long-term psychiatric facility. And while doing her chaplain residency at UCLA Medical Center, she focused on the Neuropsychiatric Institute. Years later, she became a patient in that same facility. Rabbi Berman has shared her experience, both professional and personal, with rabbis and chaplains throughout the country. She's authored the book, which she's holding right there, Ben Oni Yamin, From Sorrow to Strength, My Journey with Depression. She hopes her book will help end the stigma of mental illness and help to raise awareness about the debilitating effects of depression. She's presently manager of spiritual care at Providence Tarzana Medical Center. She's also a certified instructor in mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid. Miriam is her daughter. She's a 19-year-old mental health advocate who struggles with anxiety and depression. She just finished her first year at Valley College and is pursuing a degree in expressive arts therapy. She likes to do musical theater and volunteer. She spends her free time raising awareness about mental illness and loves to speak about her experience to help end the stigma as well. It's my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Sarah Berman and Miriam.
So thank you all for being here. I'm not good enough. I'm not a real rabbi. I'm a fraud. I don't do enough. Nobody likes me. Those are the thoughts that go through my head when I'm feeling depressed, and the thoughts that anybody with depression feels constantly. And I think everybody feels it to a certain extent, but depression lies. And so it says that even more so. So imagine having those thoughts go through your head. I'm not good enough. I don't do enough. I'm worthless. And then throughout Slichot, hearing the rabbi say, the world is falling apart and it's our job to fix it. You have to look at yourself in the year that you've been through and change and make a difference and do more. You have to become better this year. And those thoughts together can be overwhelming. And I remember I've suffered with depression most of my life on and off. It got to a really bad point about 9 years ago when I was hospitalized. And often the focus during high holidays is about making change and making yourself better and becoming a better person and focusing on all the ills of the world and how we can participate in making a difference and changing the world. And I'm here to just kind of express how that can be difficult. It doesn't mean that shouldn't be the focus of your sermon. About 1 in 4 people suffer from a mental illness, about 1 in 5 any given year. So you still have a large percentage who may need to hear that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on it, but just to kind of be aware what that could mean to somebody who is struggling. And somebody in the last session used the word loneliness. Struggling with a mental illness and being a family member of somebody with a mental illness can be very, very lonely because of the stigma. More and more is being talked about, especially within some of the Jewish community. I find in general it's still talked about as other. So they're bringing in mental health professionals talking about mental health, which is really, really important. Rabbis are talking about it, but it's still talked about as other. And I think that I'm not saying any rabbi should disclose their own history because that could be a very unsafe thing to do. But for me, it's been okay to disclose my history, which is why I do it, to show that the face of mental illness is not what you see on TV. It's not, oh, there's another mass shooting, let's do something about mental health. It's somebody who is a rabbi, a mom, a chaplain, a community member, and it's often hidden and not understood how much people suffer. So that's kind of why I'm here. We do have handouts. Miriam can hand the handout. I may or may not go over the handouts, but it's just kind of for ideas for you guys to think about. So it's not my story to tell if someone else has a mental illness. I tell my own story, but my daughter has been very open about sharing her story as well. So I'm going to let her share her story a little bit, and then we'll come back to maybe some questions. And just a little bit, just so you're aware, so this is my book, and the cover was actually designed by one of Miriam's friends who was in treatment. She was
Some of them are friends.
17 at the time I think that she designed it.
So if it has a back, then you want it back?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Actually, I'll take another one because a friend of mine had to officiate at the funeral. Thanks.
All right. So Miriam, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, my name is Miriam. I'm 19. When I was 16, I believe, I was going into my junior year of high school. I was hospitalized for the first time. I was a mental health advocate since the age of like 14 because of my mom. And mental illness runs in my family, not just with my mom, but a lot of people in my family have had mental illness. I had a cousin hospitalized for an eating disorder. So it was hard to recognize that I had to be a mental health advocate for myself when I was hospitalized. I have depression, anxiety, and OCD. And the first time I was hospitalized, I was what they call like super high functioning. Like when I went in, they were like, you don't need to be here. You're so sweet. You're so healthy. And honestly, I acted the same way that I'm acting now as someone who actually is doing really well. I acted like that, even though I was in a really bad place. So I felt like people were minimizing what I was going through because I seemed like I was doing really well. And they didn't think I needed to be there, but I really did. And so when I was there, I was released and I was put in what's called PHP, which is a partial hospitalization program. I was there for about 10 weeks, and I was really excited because I was doing really well, and they were like, you get to step down to IOP, which is a less intense version of therapy. And then I had a setback, and it was a very major setback. It was worse than the setback I had the first time, and I ended up back in the ER, and I was like taken, and I was put on a 6-day hold, a week hold. And that was really, really scary because at the ER, the people were not, I mean, at the actual hospital, people were really great, but at the ER, it was the ER that she works at. They learned de-escalation, which isn't necessarily the most helpful thing. Sometimes de-escalation is just for the safety of the nurses, but that's if you feel like you're in danger or they're in danger. So what they try to do is get you to stop screaming and yelling. And sometimes that's not always helpful because sometimes you just need that. You need to let it out. So they were telling me I was like really selfish because my mom brought me here and I needed to think about what I was doing to her and how I was hurting her. And I was like screaming and yelling because I was in so much pain. I didn't know how else to express myself. So it was really hard to start my week of hospitalization with people telling me that what I was doing was wrong and that I needed to, that I was being selfish. Because when you're in that place, you're far, far from selfish. So I was put in a hospital. I was put in Alhambra, which is specifically just psychiatric and behavioral. And then I was transferred to a residential center, which is like kind of like a group home where you're living with other people. It's like a house. I was there for about 5 weeks, and I learned a lot of skills. I was with people. We got to go to 12-step meetings, like every day we got to go to 12-step meetings, because some of the people were in other forms of recovery in my house. And I'm still friends with like a lot of, actually my roommate from the hospital illustrated this, and she's like my best friend ever. So I did make some really great friends. And when I got out of residential, I said like my goal is to be a mental health advocate, because I was a mental health advocate before, but not for myself. So I was like, the way I can be a mental health advocate is by sharing my story, not just by being there for other people, because some people aren't in a place to share their story, which is fine. But I was in a place to tell my story because that's what helps me. So not only does it help other people, but it helps me heal. So we signed up. It was like a few months after I got out of residential, we heard about the Suicide Prevention Walk, which is a 16-mile walk for suicide prevention, and we set up a campaign to raise money. We had to raise $1,000 in order to do it. And that was kind of where my mental health advocacy journey began. We've done that walk for 3 years in a row. I spoke at a daughter Yale. I led a Shabbat mental health conference with my mom, and that was very cool. And that's the thing that's helped me the most with my recovery, is speaking at different places. For some people, it's not helpful. It's not healing. It brings back memories. It's triggering. For me, it helps me. For my mom, it helps her. So being here today is a part of my own recovery and a part of her recovery as well, because we've both been through a lot, and it's important to share our story, because I know that there's so many people in this conference today that probably are struggling and we don't know about it. So.
Thank you.
So now that you hear our stories and we can share more, I kind of want to know what part of sharing also is that when I first was hospitalized, I wasn't very open about it. It was kind of slowly that I became open. Miriam allowed me to be open about her experience, which I was very grateful for, so people did know, but it kind of fell there. Like the synagogue knew, but then, and I said, can you write a card for Miriam, because she was on the board, or was supposed to be on the board of USY. Can you make sure everybody USY writes a card? Well, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So that wasn't done.
Why did they think that was bad?
Because of the stigma, because they thought, oh no, she's not going to want that. So, and not everybody would, but we specifically said it's okay. We weren't giving details, just that she was sick. It wasn't, synagogues may not be great with physical illnesses, but they often know what to do a little bit more. So a meal train might be set up, something might be set up to kind of help the family. But with mental illness, because of the stigma, there was none of that. So we kind of were, felt really unsupported by our community. And so that's one of the other reasons we like to speak, is to say there's no shame in this. It's just like any other illness. And just as there's confidentiality with other illnesses and people choose to share or not share, it could kind of be the same. And it is a long journey. It's not like you're hospitalized and then you're out and then it's done. And so to kind of recognize that, and especially with teens and the focus on where you're going to college, oh, you're going to be an empty nester. One of the rabbis said to me, well, no, I'm not going to be an empty nester, not yet, because she's not quite ready to go away. So just that's kind of one reason that we share our story, is just to kind of recognize that that the Jewish community could do a little bit more to recognize this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
When you say you felt unsupported, are there clear things that came to mind that you just wish? And I understand exactly what you were saying, and that healing and recovery looks different for each person and for each family. But I'm just curious if there are automatic things like this should have happened,
There was only
or a
one
Jewish
rabbi.
community should do X.
Usually when there's something going on in the family, like a death, we were at a temple where there's many rabbis, and the only rabbi who reached out was one that we know personally, we've known for a while, and there wasn't a thing. They didn't reach out to us at all, which was very unhelpful, because they wouldn't do that if it was a different situation like this.
I mean, I guess what it is whatever protocol, because every synagogue is different and the resources are different, but if you have a certain protocol that you might do if someone is in the hospital for a physical reason, to kind of follow the same kind of protocol, I think would be kind of what I would be suggesting. And of course, it's if the family wants, and it doesn't always have to be why. People don't know if you send out a meal train why somebody's sick or why somebody might need something. Yeah.
So this isn't specific to rabbis, but more about understanding how mental health treatment works in the United States right now. So you talked about you have different acronyms for different kinds of treatments and having setbacks and having holds and things like that. So can you give a little bit more detail? Can you kind of explain what is it like so we can kind of have a better understanding for the patient, for the family, what they're going through, what the treatment options are, and how you experience that? What would you have liked that didn't happen? What was good that did happen?
So I can share first with me. First of all, I was lucky. I had insurance that paid, and also with her, we had to pay a lot out of pocket, and we're able to do that, and not everybody can. So with me, an intervention was done at work. I hit it really, really well, but I also work in a hospital around social workers. So the social workers kind of noticed, and I were talking to them. So they did an intervention and actually drove me to UCLA, and I went voluntarily. I wasn't put on a hold. And it was very complex because, like I said, I wasn't really open, and I've been there. I've been a chaplain at UCLA neuropsych, and then they sent me to what's called partial hospitalization program, which is an everyday program for about 6 hours a day. And then I kind of transitioned. In my program, the transition was subtle, that you go from every day to 3 days a week, but they kind of let you stay longer. So it's kind of a subtle from the everyday to the intense outpatient program. And again, it was at Northridge, where I had also worked as a chaplain, and people knew me, and people even said, "You don't belong here," kind of like they did with me. I'm like, "You don't belong here. You're healthy. You're good." So that was kind of hard. So, and even taking off 6 weeks from work was like not easy as a rabbi, but I did it. So the treatment is kind of, you start at a high level, which is, you don't always start there, but in the hospital, which is really just to stabilize you, to make sure you're safe. Then, depending on how much care, you're in therapy for about 6 hours a day. Most of it is support groups, group therapy, some artwork, one-on-one counseling, psychiatrists, all of that, until you slowly are able to just go once a week to your outside counselor. And then she can share what she did, but when Miriam first went to the hospital, I had been through it, so I sort of knew what to do. Otherwise, they discharged her with nothing, even though I kept saying, I don't even have a therapist for her. She had a psychiatrist, but I don't even have a therapist for her. Please, please help me. And no one did. And so she was discharged, and if I hadn't been such an advocate and already knew, I don't know if she would have gotten the help she needed. So that's what's really important to know also, is if you do have a congregant or a family member or something who goes into treatment, they sometimes may be discharged with nothing, and to kind of say, wait, what else can be done? What level of treatment can you get?
So that's the phone calls I've been getting, I would say, in the last year or two. It's like, so my kid crashed the car into a pole to kill himself, and they're letting us go from the hospital. What do I do? And there were many this year, and I'm trying to figure out, I don't know what the best resources are besides saying, go to UCLA, go to UCLA, go to UCLA. And to be honest, I'm having a hard time figuring out, like, oh, this one's good for teens, this one's good for this, but not good for that. Do you have any direction for us as we're serving folks on that?
Can I say something?
Sure. Related
I'm
to
sure.
that.
Well, so I live in Temecula, which is fairly small, but NAMI, National Organization Mental Illness, NAMI, that is a lifesaver for the family, and it's free. NAMI.
Yeah.
Just Google NAMI. So not every NAMI group is as great as the next one, but in LA there are so many to choose from. So for the folks, for the parents, that's definitely something. And they have this program called Family to Family, which you end up with a binder this thick, and it's weeks and weeks in the family, not the patient, but the other people in the family go. And I don't have an answer for how to find a psychologist, but you might, therapist, but I
It's a
can't,
great resource. I wasn't thinking about it.
yeah, I can't say enough good
Deep
things.
Hirsch. Do you recall Deep Hirsch?
I think, well, part of it has to do, unfortunately, with insurance. And a lot of it is parents learn to be quick advocates. So a lot of it is they're out there and people just don't know. So sometimes it's calling the insurance and saying, look, my child's being discharged, but I need a higher level of care. What partial hospitalization program? So that's the terminology. Do you have, or and honestly, sometimes I just Google places and look it up. There's more for teens than for adults, and there's more for once you're an adult, it's much more difficult to find a non-substance abuse. There's a lot of substance abuse treatment centers for adults, but there's not as much partial hospitalization programs. So it's not easy. So a lot of it is just calling the insurance. When I started to relapse, I said, you know what, I need to go to an outpatient program before I get too bad. And I called my insurance. All the names they gave me were during the day. And I said, you know, if I go during the day and I have to tell my job again, this is going to cause more, it's going to be worse for me. So I found a place on my own, and I called the insurance and I said, this is the place I'm going to. And they actually approved it. So sometimes it's just kind of being an advocate and, you know, calling the insurance. But I wish I had an easier answer. But there's more places out there than you would think. So once they hear the word partial hospitalization program, then if they call the insurance, hopefully the insurance can help through it. Yes?
Can I ask a question of, you had said that it runs in your family.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking, then we're talking physiology? Genetics, okay, genetics. So then does the treatment lie in balancing drugs, things that you take that, you know, I know myself, I've taken an antidepressant for many, many years, and I've tried to get off of it, and I go directly into the blackest place, and the doctor said to me, listen, this is one of the spices you need for life. Just take it.
Yeah, so I just want to say we're not medical or mental health professionals. So,
right,
because sometimes we do talks and we get a lot of the specific. So treatment is going to be different for everybody. Some people do need medication. Some people need medication temporarily, but not their whole life. And some people don't. But that's really something between, that's why these programs are so good. That's something between kind of you and your doctor, and you and your team, because hopefully it's more than a doctor.
Okay, and I'm not just asking for myself. For instance, I know people who have schizophrenia, and you know, I personally, I don't have the training to deal with that. And when my friend was in that state, and I was visiting her at the hospital, and she was saying these things that had absolutely no relationship to the real world, and you know, looking at a picture and saying all this story about this person, and it was just, I didn't know how to accept it or to help her or to be with her even hardly. And she did so many strange things that I don't understand how it all comes about. Yeah.
I think that, what was it that you heard someone say, that they're not like hallucinations because they're real to the person? To you, it's outside of reality, but to her, it's the way she's living, it's reality.
Real. Yes.
Like that's the way that she's living, and it's reality. What I've heard has helped is like ask about the story, or ask like, who are you talking about, or tell me more about that. Instead of denying and be like, you're not saying anything. Even if you don't see it, go along with it and kind of say like, oh yeah,
what about that?
Yeah. Like going more into it, and don't say like, you're not seeing anything.
Yeah,
that's not real.
I would never be contradictory.
Because it's what she sees is her reality, what you see is your reality.
Okay, so it's not detrimental to hear more about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know is it playing into it, is it bad to but thank you for that.
I think if it is detrimental, because if it's voices, and I teach a class on mental health first aid, and one of the sections is on psychosis. If it is detrimental, if it becomes like, oh, these voices are telling me to do something bad or whatever, and you're not necessarily trained in it, so there's not too much you can do, but you can say, well, can you ask them to leave just right now? They may not be able to leave for good, but can you ask them to leave just right now so we can talk? Or can you ask them to, and sometimes that works, because they may not have control over the voices, but sometimes they can quiet for a little bit, just till, or do you want to hear them? If you don't want to hear them, maybe we can, I can take you someplace and they can help you so that you're not hearing those.
Okay.
Or seeing it or whatever it is.
So I have two different questions. One of them is I've heard of, that there's a desire for rabbis to give a sermon on the topic, but I have no idea what's my entry point. Like what are the stories and what are the ways in which what are the rabbinic sources you can utilize to sort of walk your way into mental health? And I mean, there's nothing that you've said that is new to me or surprising me, and I welcome it and I accept it, but I just don't know how to work on the pulpit. So that's one question. And then the totally different question is, I very much recognize that you're talking about the idea of, when the way we look doesn't match the way we feel. So how, what are the language or what are the visual cues that we look for beyond, oh, you look fine, because you talked about it's starting to relax. Like, how do you know that this is starting to happen? So those are the two different questions.
So the second question, one of the answers I will give you can relate to the first question. So one of the things, especially for high holidays, and that's the thing I handed out, is the idea of listening to Sarah when she's complaining about Ishmael, to listen to her voice. We always translate it as obey her or listen to her, but it's actually listen to her voice. So a lot of times it's about, and so that also can be sometimes an entryway into it in a discussion in a text, is the idea that the words don't always match the voice. And sometimes if we listen to the voice and the expressions that people are giving you and the kind of side comments that they're saying to you, and you can tell something's wrong, and then you kind of say, I know you're telling me you're okay, but if I were going through that, that would be difficult. So how do you want to explore more? Or you're telling me you're okay, but it sounds like you may not be. Do you want to tell me more? So just kind of label it and then see where it goes. And they may not want to, but if they do, you've kind of entered the door. So that kind of is one of the Jewish texts. Another Jewish text that I like a lot, actually this was Miriam's bat mitzvah text, and she talked about it, was the idea of leprosy. And who are the lepers in our society now? It's generally those with mental illness, and a different way of approaching mental illness. So that's, and then from a personal perspective of somebody going through it, the idea of being created in God's image is always helpful to me. That, I never lost my faith. That's actually probably what kept me going. And Miriam did lose her faith, so that was kind of a different experience in how do you deal with somebody who lost their faith. But I don't know if that answers your question, but those are kind of the three texts that I like to use.
You talked about depression, and hearing the message on the high holidays that it's not helpful to hear, you got to get better. Were there messages pastorally that helped you? Obviously, treatment is, everyone relates to, talks about medicine versus different kinds of therapies. Were there pastoral moments that were helpful, in particular with depression?
That's a good question. I think for me, I was very lucky in that I kept the faith, and so the idea of being created in God's image and God being there for me was very helpful. The rabbis in my life who just kind of stayed there and said, I'm there for you, there's no shame, that was helpful.
Like, I didn't necessarily have this experience, but you had this experience where during the high holidays they talk about asking for forgiveness, but you can ask for forgiveness for yourself, for being mean to yourself. I think that helped me.
Yeah. So sometimes turning it on to maybe I don't have to change the world, I have to change myself right now. And that's actually, there's an Ashamnu that I put in there. That's kind of that idea of forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
But it's hard to remember like specific things that were said. It's much more just and I think you've learned this in your pastoral care, is that it's just the presence and just being there and being open to letting people talk.
One of my colleagues described this as, we rabbis want to make things better. We want to say, Refuah Shlema, and that it'll be quick and you will heal. And that we want, the Jewish holidays are sort of that symbol of like, yeah, it's a new cycle, everything's better, start fresh. And they said, when you're in it, you don't want to see somebody reaching down from above with one hand. This notion that I'm going to pull you out, you actually want to see them in the valley, in the pit, standing next to you. And that we, in Judaism, our liturgy, especially during the high holidays, and our rabbinic presence is almost always about, let me reach the hand out, pull you up, an outstretched arm, but never to just stand there. Stand next to, be there. That we're impatient.
Yeah. Just to add to that, once I heard this metaphor or whatever it is, that sympathy is that when somebody is in a hole, that person is sandwich. But empathy is just to go down to the hole and climb up together. And the sandwich or whatever it is, it's the quickie, the one that is going to. We want to believe that it's going to just solve the whole problem, but it's a journey, and we have to feel the pain. And sometimes, when we don't see something, what you were saying at the beginning, that you were in the hospital and yelling and screaming. I was thinking about that the other day. The last 4 days, I was this is the third clergy or religious place I've been, and all of them, the main subject was mental health in Argentina, because there is a very important component, and you can define it whichever way you want. That is the spiritual side, and there's spirituality within atheist people. So we just have to find the way to connect. I think one of the most difficult parts is the lack of connection, right? So, in my, some of what myself we are going on, that there's no sharing with what is wrong, and I don't know, and that would be my question: how do you get somebody to share? Because for you it's therapeutic to talk to all of us. To some, it would be therapeutic in a one-on-one situation. But what do you do with somebody that you believe is in a place of anxiety and depression and doesn't want to share, doesn't want to come out, doesn't want to go to therapy or those things?
I think what both of you said is really powerful. And I was at a clergy and mental health conference, and actually one of the rabbis said, oh, well, I like, the 23rd Psalm about walking in the darkness, that because you'll walk through the darkness. And I said, no, wait a minute, stop, pause. Sometimes you just have to sit in the darkness. Yes, maybe The idea is that you walk out of it, but the first step is sitting in the darkness. And this was at a mental health, talk. So to him, it was this idea. It is great we can walk in the darkness together, and that's not a bad idea. But that's the second step. The first step is sitting in the darkness, and just able to do that. And it's also important to recognize, like Miriam is an advocate and helps others. I help others, but we have to be very careful to not be in that darkness too long, because then we may not get out. So you also have to.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah, if you're in especially if you've been there yourself, it's good to help others, but kind of be careful of your community members who have gone through it and then they want to help others that they may not be able to pull themselves out. So they have to be in a mirror. We had to wait till she couldn't do anything while she was in active treatment, and that was hard for her, but her therapist like, nope, sorry, you can't help other people, you just have to help yourself. So
I had to stop all my volunteer.
Yeah, she had to stop all her volunteer work. So you have to be in a good place. And I wish I had an answer for you. If they don't want any help, it's really hard. Sometimes it's just sitting there and saying, I will sit with you right now, but once it gets to a point where it's where it's just really dangerous, I'll sit with you right now in this darkness because I know you're there. But, I'm going to give you a timeline. So next week we're going to start walking. And then the following week we're going to take 3 steps out. And then we're going to, so if it's kind of created boundaries within that, it's like, okay, you have today to just sit here and I know this is how you feel, but tomorrow we're not going to do a lot. We're going to take 1 step. And then the next day we're going to take 2 steps. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And also, this is something so big for me, because sometimes people think they're scared of silence, and I learned this because I volunteered at a teen crisis hotline. It's better to listen and not say anything with the intention of being there for them than to say something not helpful with the intention of trying to get out of it or come up with a solution. Sometimes it's better to say nothing and just sit there than to say stuff that's not helpful. Listening is so important.
Miriam, what you're saying is it's our job to support, not to fix.
Yes.
So that's a really tricky thing to hear, particularly if you're a female rabbi, because and a middle-aged Jewish housewife to boot, because what is my role? My whole role in my life has been to fix. And now, as a rabbi who does this kind of work, it's simply to support the person where they are in the moment. And to say, my job is not to fix, because once you start trying to fix, you end up causing a problem, a bigger problem. Yeah, and the fixing happens organically simply by the support, by holding them up. That's what I've experienced.
I think the key word that was mentioned was presence.
Mm-hmm.
To be present.
So I have a story about a person who's in physical illness that has given me questions about mental. The very short version of the story of the physical illness was we had a teen who ended up in the hospital with a ruptured appendix. And the reason that no one diagnosed it as a ruptured appendix was she was at the age where menstrual cramps were an easy thing to mix up. So everyone just assumed in her family, even her physician, that she was having cramps. It was a normal 12, 13-year-old thing. They completely missed this really blatant thing, and she ended up in the hospital for a really long time because of it. The metaphor that's given to me in a lot of ways, particularly with teens, but I mean with adults as well, is I wonder how many times we see certain things from a mental illness standpoint that look garden variety to those of us who aren't sufferers ourselves. And we don't know that they're actually things that are much worse. We haven't lived it, we haven't seen it. So using that as a metaphor, I would be curious, Miriam for you in particular, but Sarah also as well, what are things that we should see that you need to be paying attention to and not missing, while at the same time not also thinking that every little bout of sadness that people go through is a depressive incident?
For me, and for her as well, my mental illness manifests a lot physically, so I'll complain of stomach aches and headaches, and stomach problems, and being nauseous. Or I'll say that because I'm embarrassed. I'll stay home sick because I'm embarrassed to say I'm depressed. So complaining of like chest hurting, stomach hurting, trouble breathing. If there's a major change in their personality, sometimes it's very, very hard to notice. But with some people, there's a huge change in personality that is from one day to the next. It's a complete change. That's not normal. And any joke ever, like about any comment about self-harm or suicide, I hear so many suicide jokes, and it annoys me a lot because they should always be taken seriously. Any comment that seems like it's not a big deal, but it mentions suicide at all, even if they're safe, you can't take that
You have to at
risk.
least ask.
Yeah, you can't take the risk and just be like, oh, it's probably just a joke.
Yeah, and I think changes, that's a key issue. If you're in touch with a person, because this week I have to have the training again on suicide and all those things that I have every year in prison. If a person is eating more or eating less, that's a sign. If a person, the mood is different, person that's giving away things, and you would think, oh, how generous. It might be a sign of something inside, and and as Sarah said, I think, and it's a key word in our tradition, right? Shema, listen. We have to listen not only to the words, but to the modulation, to the body language, to everything that is in there. And to do that, we have to be there and sit in the darkness and have the patience and the presence of mind to be there. And not, okay, so now I have to do something else and get back to you when I have time.
Well, but here's where these things I think are especially because we're at that point looking at suicide watch, are things that are really advanced. Well, part of what I'm trying to figure out as a general clergy and non-medical professional is at what point does being someone who's just down actually go to the point of being depression? Because all of us have moments where we see people we know are healthy, and for one reason or another, they are down for a period of time. And that's not necessarily a mental illness cause. You don't want to always set up those alarms. But where's the line, and what can you start to see between down and depression?
It's a very hard question.
So I'm thinking, I totally forgot about this, but because you mentioned teens, I remember in my teen experience, and there were 2 moments as a teenager where other people intervened, and they intervened with the perspective of I'm the one who's going to solve this. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing. As rabbis, we're the ones who have to figure out are they down or are they suicidal. And I think the most helpful thing we can do as rabbis is to be like, I don't know. I need a person who knows in this picture. Because in both cases with me as a teen, the person who came in, they addressed it, they got an answer, they were done. And I mean, I'm lucky because I know everything's fine. But now, as I think about it, how weird is that, right? They came in, they talked to me, they're done. But it's like, actually, it was clear that they weren't equipped to deal with what was presented to them. So they should have brought someone else in. And I feel like maybe that's part of the answer here. Is that if we don't know, we have to say, I don't know, I gotta find someone else.
I think a lot of it is, it's a difficult question to answer because somebody who is feeling depressed often doesn't know it themselves. Especially if they've been living with depression for many, many years. It's like the status quo. They don't know they can feel better. But I think a lot of times it's just showing your concern and saying, it's normal for teens to have like the stomach pain, it's normal. But if it's a little bit, if using your physical example, normally their pain is at a 6 and it's at an 8, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be concerned, but I am concerned. So to kind of just express that you're concerned, you're not there to fix it, you just kind of say, you seem a little bit more withdrawn than usual, or you're not engaging in class as much, and they may just say, oh, well, my grandpa's been really, really sick and that's on my mind. Yeah. Okay, so it may not be anything else, but at least you kind of got the feelers out there. Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to say, which wouldn't, is often you do have to get professionals that are not clergy. So Miriam started to have signs. I knew I was going to set her up with a therapist when she came back from Israel. She went on pilgrimage. Mm-hmm. But we still hadn't set it up. We had lots of problems. She went on pilgrimage. They sent her to a therapist on pilgrimage, but they didn't tell me. So that's another thing, is like, just as if you sent your child
They said that they sent everyone to the therapist.
Yeah, when I called and complained, they said, oh, everybody goes, which isn't true. So that's one thing, is that, even though confidentiality, if you feel like you need professional help, you want to tell the parents. So you guys seem to think that's obvious, but they didn't think it was
Some
obvious.
people don't.
So now that's different than if you're clergy, just talking to the person and showing your concern. Depending on your level of concern, you can just keep it confidential and just say, I'm just concerned about you, I want to know. And if there's no red flags, then you can leave it at that. If there's some red flags, then you might want to get. And the red flags are what we said: the change in appetite, the change in behavior, the not eating, not enjoying things. For me, I know that I'm going back into depression when I don't enjoy things that I normally do. So for me, that's what it is. Everybody might have a different thing, but you usually enjoy song sessions so much, you're not enjoying it now.
Or if they're really depressed, it seems like for a long time, a big red flag is if all of a sudden they're really excited about something. That's not normal, because possibly not normal, because it could mean they have already made a plan or something.
Would you say when they are excited about something?
Yeah, if they're depressed for a really long time, same thing along the lines of a major personality change, and then they all of a sudden seem excited. Part of it is giving away their stuff, but they seem like happy about something. That's usually a sign that they have made a plan and they've made their decision. Yeah.
So if you're working with teenagers, every single thing that we've said has to be taken with 25 grains of salt. Because
and it's not just teenagers.
It's just, but is that what you were talking about? Or this was like,
listen this way, the original thing happened with teens, and I do work a fair amount with them, but I was asking both for teens and for the general world. I know that the teens are a more challenging population than this in particular, because of the tremendous amount of change that they're going through at any given moment. But I think we also underestimate the amount of challenges that grown adults go through, and often pass off those natural changes as being too typical when they aren't.
I think the main thing is just being open to approach the person and saying, I'm concerned. That's probably the number one. Or even if you're not concerned, even if you meet with people, whether it's an adult or a child, just to say, I see you and this is what I observe. And they may say they're fine, and they may be fine, or they may just be saying that, and that's okay. But I think the main thing is that you let people know that you see them and not be afraid of approaching them. Because very seldom are people going to be offended by saying, this is what I've noticed, I'm concerned. I guess it's time.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to wrap it up with one final thought, or is that?
No, I think that's good. If any of you want to contact me for questions that weren't answered, or if you do want mental health first aid or needs mental health first aid taught, my email you probably have, but it's Rabbi Sarah B. There's no H on my name at gmail.com. Feel free to contact me, look over some of the material. Thank you.